This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Hone, and it is Saturday, so that means it's time to continue my history of the banned and restricted list. In this series, I talk about what cards were banned and restricted in a given time frame, and explain why it happened that way. This series focuses only on formats that have premier level events. This means formats like Commander and Pauper aren't going to be included. This series started way back with looking at the list from 1994, and in this episode we'll be covering 2017. Over the last few episodes of this series, we've seen some major problems crop up as a result of new powerful cards being printed. In 2015, Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time got banned or restricted in every format but Standard, and in 2016 we had Eldrazi Winter, where newly printed Eldrazi made the deck too good for the modern format, resulting in the banning of Eye of Ugin. These pushed new cards caused some problems, but they had at least all been cards that were perfectly fair for Standard. In fact, Wizards hadn't had to ban anything in Standard since 2011, a fairly impressive streak. In 2017, though, all of that came to an end. In 2017, 8 cards were added to the banned and restricted list for the first time, and 5 of those had to be banned out of Standard. Unfortunately, this would be the beginning of a new normal. Since 2017, Wizards has had to ban several cards in Standard every year. The first announcement of 2017 came in January. This announcement banned 3 cards in Standard: EMRAKUL the Promised End, SMUGGLER'S Copter, and REFLECTOR Mage. It also banned 2 cards in Modern, GITAXIAN Probe and Golgari Grave Troll. We talked about the Grave Troll back in the video on the first part of 2011, when it got banned for the first time, so I won't be talking about it again here. Let's start with EMRAKUL, the Promised End. In our last video, we saw that the modern format got really messed up for a while as a result of powerful new Eldrazi being printed. 2017 also suffered as a result of a powerful new Eldrazi, and for sort of similar reasons. The problem in 2016 was they printed cheap Eldrazi who could be powered out early in Modern. The problem in 2017 was only one Eldrazi, but it was once again that the card was a little bit too easy to play. And the format also had a card that could help you cheat big creatures into play, one we'll be looking at later in this video. Anyway, when you cast her, EMRAKUL steals an opponent's turn. In addition to being massive, evasive, and immune to instants, it might seem like they have powered down the Mindslaver effect here, since your opponent gets to take their turn right after you take a turn for them, and yeah, that is less powerful than Mindslaver, but it still wasn't powered down enough. The fact is, you were usually able to screw up your opponent's whole game by stealing one turn, pointing removal at their own creatures, making ugly attacks into EMRAKUL, and so forth, and you could screw it up so much that even your opponent getting their turn right after wasn't usually enough. Eventually, about half the decks in Standard were running EMRAKUL one way or another, as she was an absolutely insane win condition that pretty much ended the game on the spot. This included Energy decks, Golgari Delirium, Temur Emerge, and yeah, a bunch of other decks too. She got banned in January 2017 because she was too ubiquitous, something that often happens when you make a super powerful card that's colorless. EMRAKUL would remain banned in Standard for the rest of her time there, but she has proven powerful enough to also see play in other formats, including Pioneer and Modern. Next, let's look at Smuggler's Copter, another powerful colorless card that was played by a huge chunk of the field. So vehicles were new back in 2017, so this is another example of a new pushed mechanic being a little bit too good. The Copter often amounts to being a 2-mana 3/3 with flying that loots every turn, and it also happens to be immune to multiple types of removal like board sweepers, since it isn't usually going to be a creature on your opponent's turn. Crew 1 is just way too easy to make work, since you can play a creature and immediately use it to crew the Copter every turn, and virtually every creature in your deck will be able to do that. Sure, your deck needed to have a lot of creatures in it, but aggro decks had no problem with that, especially if the upside is playing this powerful card. While EMRAKUL was played in just about every mid-range and control deck in the Standard of the time, Smuggler's Copter was played in every creature-heavy aggro deck, to the point that the Standard of the time was really just a showdown between these two powerful colorless cards. Its very presence in Standard made it so no one wanted to play Planeswalkers or Sorcery Speed removal, and edging those types of things out of the format is definitely not what you want to be doing. The Copter and EMRAKUL had to be banned together. Only banning one or the other would have just led to the other deck becoming the dominant one. The banning of the Copter came especially swiftly, as it had only been printed about 3 months before getting the ban hammer. The Copter remained banned for the rest of the time in Standard, and it hasn't found Premier level success anywhere else since the ban came, though it is being played some in Pioneer. The last card to be banned out of Standard in January of 2017 was Reflector Mage. Reflector Mage is arguably the best mana war ever, since a 3-mana 2/3 that bounces something and makes it so whatever you bounce can't be played on your opponent's next turn is pretty crazy. Reflector Mage did not have a whole lot of time left in Standard in January of 2017, but because both EMRAKUL and COPTER were banned, Wizards was worried that Azorius Flash decks would become too strong. Those Flash decks also played COPTER, so they were especially hard hit by this banning announcement, which essentially took the deck out of the top tier. While the banning of COPTER and EMRAKUL were hardly contentious, people were pretty surprised to see Reflector Mage get banned so close to rotation. And as we'll see with the next announcement of 2017, people were probably right, as a couple of new powerful decks emerged that Azorius Flash might have been able to keep in check. In the end, Reflector Mage remained banned in Standard for the rest of its time there, but it has gone on to find success in modern Humans decks. These 3 bannings really shook up Standard, but there would still be more problems to come for the format in 2017. Now that we talked about the 3 Standard bannings in January of 2017, let's move on to the new card added to the modern ban list with this announcement. That card is GITAXIAN Probe. GITAXIAN Probe is the kind of card that I think a lot of people overlook because it doesn't seem like it does a whole lot. You get some information about your opponent's hand and you draw a card. Surely that's not something that needs to be banned, right? Well, the problem here is that GITAXIAN Probe costs Phyrexian mana. This means that it is an essentially free spell and one that can be run in any deck regardless of color. In a way, Probe makes it so your deck essentially has 56 cards, since you can play it for free, and that makes your deck a little more consistent too. Probe had been around in Modern since the beginning though, so let's talk about what happened in 2017 that led to it being banned in Modern, restricted in Vintage later that year, and then banned in Legacy in the following year in 2018. In Modern, the main problem it presented came in decks that sought to win the game quickly, with creatures who become large in a hurry and can end the game in a swing or two. This included decks like Jeskai Ascendancy, Infect, Kiln Fiend Aggro, and Death's Shadow. I want to focus on the last of these to give you an idea of how important GITAXIAN Probe was for those decks. So, Death's Shadow decks usually sought to rapidly lower their life and make a huge Death's Shadow, then win the game with Temur Battle Rage or another trick. GITAXIAN Probe did 3 different things for these decks, and it did them for free. First, it helped them lower their life, something they want to do to make their Death's Shadow big. Second, it helped them find the cards they needed to do lethal out of nowhere, whether it's a Death's Shadow or a Temur Battle Rage or another trick. Third, it gave them the details about the opponent's hand. The last part should not be overlooked. Death's Shadow decks were very interested in using tricks to win the game, and doing that when your opponent has removal up is very dangerous. With Probe, you would always know whether or not it was time for you to go for it. And remember, all of this applies to all of these other decks too, like Infect, Kiln Fiend Aggro, and so forth. The problem was that these decks could frequently win before turn 4, and Modern isn't supposed to be a format where you can consistently win before turn 4, and GITAXIAN Probe was viewed as a big problem there. If you know your opponent can't interact with you, and you can kill them on turn 3, you're going to do it, and these decks could do it often enough that Wizards decided to ban GITAXIAN Probe to weaken these types of decks. The Probe was also banned in Vintage later on in 2017. In Vintage, the main problem was Monastery Mentor decks, which were loaded up with free card draw like the Probe and could quickly make a prowess army that became incredibly large incredibly quickly. Giving the deck access to 4 copies of GITAXIAN Probe was a little bit too much, and banning it helped slow the deck down some, though as we'll see later on in this video, Mentor decks were probably not weakened as much as they needed to be. The Probe also got banned in Legacy, with the ban hammer for that format coming in 2018. There, the banning was made to slow down Storm decks in the format, which benefited greatly from free card draw spells. It also helped weaken Delver decks, which were making up too much of the metagame. Alright, so those are 4 cards that got banned in January of 2017, and 3 of them had to be banned in Standard. Let's look now at both the April and June announcements together. Each of them banned a single card in Standard. Some other cards were also banned, like Sensei's Divining Top in Legacy, but that's a card we covered earlier in this series. In this video, let's just focus on the 2 cards that got added to the banned and restricted list for the first time between these 2 announcements, and those are FELIDAR Guardian and AETHERWORKS Marvel. Let's talk about FELIDAR Guardian first, since it was the card to get banned first. Funnily enough, FELIDAR Guardian was not initially banned in the April 2017 announcement, which at first said that no cards were banned out of Standard. The announcement came originally on April 24, 2017, But only 2 days later, on April 26, 2017, an addendum was made to that announcement to ban FELIDAR Guardian. According to Wizards, this was because they had more data 2 days later to make the decision, but I suspect that public outcry about the Guardian not being banned was a motivating factor to accelerate its banning. So why did it need to be banned anyway? Well, because it helped enable a turn 4 combo in Standard. The plan was to play Saheeli Rai on turn 3, and then the Guardian on turn 4. You then use Saheeli's -2 ability, which makes a copy of the Guardian, which then blinks Saheeli, and you can do this as many times as you want until you have a cat army that can do lethal to your opponent. Wizards admitted overlooking this combo, which is kind of crazy. These decks were affectionately called Copycat, and they dominated Standard for the brief time the deck was allowed to exist, but the Guardian getting banned obviously put an end to that deck. The Guardian remained banned for the remainder of its time in Standard. The last Standard card to be banned in 2017 was AETHERWORKS Marvel, yet another very powerful colorless card. In Kaladesh, Wizards introduced Energy, a mechanic that ended up being a little too strong. While AETHERWORKS Marvel is the only energy card to get banned in 2017, we're going to see more of that going on in 2018. Suffice it to say, making energy was too easy, and AETHERWORKS Marvel was an incredibly powerful place where you could use that energy. Obviously, it helps you make energy all on its own, but most Marvel decks could play this on turn 4 and have the 6 energy they needed to immediately activate it. So, earlier in this video, we talked about EMRAKUL the Promised End. While it was legal in Standard, that was the ideal thing that the Marvel could cheat into play for you. The banning of EMRAKUL was meant to weaken a lot of decks, including AETHERWORKS Marvel, and while it kind of did, it didn't weaken them enough. Marvel decks still had access to other silly Eldrazi, like Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. It is particularly nasty that the Marvel actually has you cast the spell, meaning that you get this powerful cast trigger. So, since Marvel decks were not sufficiently weakened by the banning of EMRAKUL, Wizards realized that they had to ban the Marvel itself, and they did in June of 2017. The last announcement in 2017 came in August, and it restricted 2 cards in Vintage, Thorn of Amethyst and Monastery Mentor. Let's start with the Mentor, since it's a card that I mentioned earlier. As discussed above, part of the reason that GITAXIAN Probe got restricted in Vintage was because of Monastery Mentor decks. While that hurt the deck a little bit, Vintage decks still had way too much access to free draw spells that could let you rip through your deck while amassing an impressive army. Monastery Mentor decks had become an entire archetype in their own right, and it makes sense Wizards wanted to avoid restricting the Mentor himself, at least initially, but they weren't really left with a choice. He was just too good, too many people were playing him, and he was restricted as a result. The other card to get restricted in Vintage in August of 2017 was Thorn of Amethyst. In 2016, we saw that Lodestone Golem had to be restricted, and in 2015, it was Chalice of the Void. These are all prison-type cards that make life hard on your opponent by making it harder for them to cast their spells. These were particularly useful in artifact-heavy shops decks, which loaded up with artifacts that had tax effects. Those decks made up too much of the metagame. Previous bannings just hadn't done enough to nerf it, and before Monastery Mentor and Thorn of Amethyst got banned in 2017, basically everyone was playing one of these 2 decks in Vintage, and obviously, that's not really what you want to see in a format where almost every single card is legal. There should be some more diversity than that. Additionally, Wizards does what they can to protect the Moxen and Black Lotus in Vintage, as it's the only format where you can play those. A card like Thorn of Amethyst can hedge those cards out of a format, and that isn't what you want to see in Vintage. So in the end, 2017 was a rough year for Wizards. They printed new cards that completely messed up Standard, and they had to take action in all of the other Premier formats too to make them more diverse. They pushed 2 new mechanics, Vehicles and Energy, and they went a little too far with both. Next time we'll look at 2018, a year where only 4 cards had to be banned, which might sound like a pretty good year, but all 4 of them had to be banned out of Standard. Well, that does it for this episode of the History of the Banned and Restricted List. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future episodes of this series, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to watch more than 20 other videos in this series, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.